I've come to understand more and more that emotional depth is a pretty significant superpower. Understanding better the emotions that are driving us is really like entering a whole new world. I think it's a lot like in stories, in movies and literature, when the protagonist enters, gets initiated into this whole new world where they find their own powers and their own gifts and their own path that they're meant to be on. Discovering our own emotional depth is in some ways kind of like entering that sort of magical world. In this video, I want to talk about why I think it's a superpower, what we can do to really bring it into our lives. And towards the end, I'll talk about how this relates to some of the dynamics that probably most of us are shaped by in childhood. First of all, emotional depth is a superpower because it opens up tremendous possibility in life. If instead we're just kind of driven by our emotions in a very unconscious and automatic way, then that is what our life is going to look like, right? It's going to be very predictable, and we're just going to kind of move down a very predictable, conditioned pathway. If instead we are sort of continually bringing awareness to what is going on below the surface for us emotionally, then that opens up tremendous possibility, and I would say will almost invariably have a very significant positive impact on the most important areas of our lives, right? Our relationships, our careers, our friendships, etc. And if we're not doing that, if we're not continually bringing awareness to what is going on below the surface emotionally for us, then our life is probably going to be organized largely around these things that are below the surface, largely around this pain. And it's probably going to be oriented around a lot of our fear and insecurity and things like that. And so if we have a way of continually bringing awareness to that, continually transforming that within ourselves, then that opens up tremendous possibility for us. And over time, it amounts to something very, very powerful. Now, this is something that really became clear for me as I saw people of the much older generation who had done this work over time, right? Over many years, they had done this kind of thing. And then I also saw many, many more people of that older generation who hadn't. And you could just tell the difference, right? Even just the experience of being around them was so incredibly different. And of course, what their lives looked like was very, very different. And it just became really clear to me which approach through life was superior and which one I wanted to aim for. And so a lot of this is just about inquiring more and more into how the external in life lands for you internally. Really noticing that and then really just integrating that over time. And then you do that at your own pace and over time. In addition to being a superpower, because it opens up tremendous possibility, emotional depth is also a superpower because it radically improves our ability to navigate other people. And obviously this is tremendously consequential because navigating other people has a huge impact on our quality of life and generally our success in life. And the reason it helps in this regard is because we are just able to see what other people are bringing up for us, in our own emotional body. And so when we're able to do that, we just have a much better sense of what other people are doing in our lives and how we can communicate with them and the kind of decisions that we want to make with regard to them. The other great thing about developing more and more emotional depth is that it very much keeps us grounded. It keeps us grounded to what is real for us. And it's kind of like a guide for where to go next. And I think it really is very much a part of how we find ourselves. And very importantly, it keeps us from going off on paths that are fundamentally about avoiding pain. And this is really significant because I think this is really how we ruin ourselves, right? This is how we ruin our lives, is we go off on these directions that are really about running from pain. And so if we can actually understand our internal pain, which everybody has, I think everybody has a lot of internal pain. If we can understand that better and learn from that, then, we can really avoid some of the pitfalls that end up ruining people. Another reason why emotional depth stands out to me as a superpower is because it's very much not the norm. Of course, many more people are going to therapy today. Probably there's a lot of therapy speak around, but I do often question how much depth this really shows, right? How much depth this really represents. Maybe it's some more than the past, but I would still say that a really significant degree of emotional depth, in my experience, just really doesn't seem like the norm. And so therefore it can stand out very much in a positive way, but that also presents challenges, right? Because it's like when we are kind of leaving the norm of our culture in some ways, that can be difficult, right? It can be difficult because it's like, where do we look, right? We really have to look for the right kind of resources for us to help guide us moving forward. And it can also be different because, then we are becoming different than the people around us. So it's very much a superpower in that regard. But I think it can also present some interesting challenges that then we have the opportunity to deal with. One of the key reasons why I would argue most of us don't get on this path really early in life of, really deeply and fully dealing with our own emotional world is because it's not really allowed. If we put aside the rhetoric, most of what is expected of us as kids is to suppress ourselves emotionally and just generally suppress our own full, authentic, empowered selves. That is not really something that is encouraged, right? Generally, what is demanded of us is adaptation, is loss of self, is conformity. And so this is something that we kind of have to be, you could say, initiated into in adulthood. And I think that is a very exciting process, and it's a very exciting a journey to go on because we're really able to kind of shift out of those earlier patterns. Now, how can we practice this, right? How can we develop more of this emotional depth? Well, I would say that generally I see three main aspects to this, three main steps, you could say, just to kind of boil this down into more concrete terms. And this, of course, has been my experience. So this is basically what I've been doing in this regard for the last many years. And so this is just kind of my own thing. So the first that I would say, it's really about slowing down. So in order to really be present with and understand what is going on for us in terms of our emotional depth, we have to slow down enough to see that. And there are different things that one can do that can be helpful for this. Probably the most basic one is just setting an intention for it, right? Setting an intention to slow down and notice our emotions. But, also people like meditation, people like being in nature, some people like journaling for this. And then there's also some more kind of obscure things that we can do, like flotation tanks. Some people like things like that. But really it's just about slowing down enough to notice what's going on. And then the second thing is to really be present in our body, right? It's to be present with what we're actually feeling. And taking whatever time we need to release that, hopefully as fully as possible in that moment. And, if it's like a very significant, maybe emotional wound that we're dealing with, then we might need to take a decent chunk of time to really work through that. Or maybe we just need to pause in the moment and take just, a quick moment to be present with that. And then the third step, and very importantly, this is the last, is we then understand it in terms of our own words, right? So we can then bring words to what is going on, bring words to the emotion, like naming it, and also understanding the context in which it occurred. And very importantly, this is the last step, because I think that it's really important that we be present with what's going on and really feel it as fully as possible before we then think about it, because often we will have a tendency to try to just, avoid the actual difficult feelings and just go straight to a story about it. But if we can do those first two steps, then I would say that then it can actually be very helpful and very powerful to start naming it and starting to kind of understand the context in which it occurred. Now, stepping back here for a moment and looking at the bigger picture, I would say that, as I see it, this is one of 4 core pillars of self-awareness, emotional depth, right? The others would be awareness of our thoughts, so what's going on up here, awareness of our bodies, and this is related to emotions, but it's a bit different, right? So it's like maybe we're holding some tension in our shoulders or in our face, right? But it's awareness of our physical bodies. And then the last would be awareness of our behavior. And this whole self-awareness path, right? Because it's not just emotions, it's also these other things. Bringing awareness to all of that, transforming all of that over time, upgrading all of that in our own way, is something that is very profound, very powerful. And what I found and what I believe is that it's very, very important that that is a process that we are sovereign over. It's something that we have power over. I think that is incredibly important, that we are the authority over that sort of self-awareness journey. That is what I just value tremendously. And this idea that we need to have sovereignty over this, that we need to basically be in charge of our own development of these areas at the end of the day, that is not a message that I hear very often. I hear it almost never. It's something that you hear if you really go looking for it. And I just find that stunning. I find that stunning that that isn't something that is talked about extremely widely. And so I'll say it again. Having sovereignty over this project of self-awareness is something that is an incredibly fundamental, important aspect of life. It's one of the most important parts of life. And something that I find stunning and quite frankly insufferable is the fact that this principle is totally disrespected, especially when it comes to children. These things, right, these aspects of our lives and our inner world are so often, for kids, brought under the control of professional authorities, like kids being sent or forced to go to therapists, where we are encouraged or often forced to talk about our thoughts and feelings, or social and emotional learning programs in schools, right, where the development of our social and emotional skills are basically brought under this kind of professional authority within school. And maybe some people benefit from some of these things in some ways. Maybe they like it. And I'm certainly not trying to invalidate that at all. But I do think at the end of the day, it's very problematic because these most, you could say, sacred and intimate aspects of our lives are being brought under this authority. So it's not something that we have authority over. And so I think that a lot of doing this work, like I've been talking about, it's not just about starting to do this work. It's about bringing it under our own authority. Because, it's probably true that in a different era, kids might have come from, very coercive, very emotionally invalidating, very kind of behavioral control-based environments where our feelings and our thoughts were more kind of overtly and aggressively dismissed. And then we can become adults and, choose to do whatever we want, right? Get into meditation or do like whatever seeking we want to do or find a therapist that we like. And in some ways that was kind of an easier path because because our lives and our inner world hadn't been so profoundly colonized. But I would say that now, when you have, all of this therapy for kids and all these different programs and things like that, and all this, like, teaching emotional intelligence, all of that kind of thing, all of these very important things get appropriated, they get co-opted, and and we basically become conditioned to deferring to professional authorities on these things. Whereas I think that, at least for many of us, we fundamentally have the right to be our own authority on it, right? If we want to give our power away in some ways, like, that's great. That, people should have the right to do whatever they want, but we should totally have the right to be our own authority on that. And I would say that right is seriously infringed upon and not taken seriously or understood properly. And also, these kind of do-gooder interventions for kids very often distract from the real issues that kids are facing. And this is part of why it's so problematic, right? Is because it's like these kinds of self-awareness practices and self-awareness approaches should be a part of engaging with our lives more truthfully and more effectively. But instead, what they do when it becomes under the domain of these professional authorities is so often they do the opposite. They detract from the truth of our lives. They force us to disconnect from them. And in that way, they can become a very potent and very complicated form of psychological abuse, right? So it's like, for many kids, what are the real problems that we're facing? Well, the people that we're around are causing us to suffer because they have their own problems, right? That's a big thing. Or we're stuck in the authoritarian school system, which many kids find literally oppressive. They find it very oppressive because it's so authoritarian, so controlling, and there's so much disregard for who we really are. And so then, a professional authority comes in and says, oh, no, the problem is that you lack regulation skills, or you lack, the ability to properly pay attention, or you lack social skills. And so it's like they take us away from the truth of our lives. And that just has absolutely devastating consequences. And so again, doing this work it's a lot about just bringing the power back to us when it comes to our own development and evolution in these areas. And I think fundamentally the reason why the world is this way to such a great degree is because it's basically just where the awareness is at, right? Like, I'm not really trying to blame anybody. It's just kind of like it's just where the culture is at. It's where the awareness of things is at. And so it just like doesn't have the download or like the operating model to really get like what it is we're talking about here. And so we have to create that awareness for ourselves. So these are some of my thoughts on emotional depth, why it's a superpower in my opinion, and also kind of the broader context. So I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching it all the way to the end. Please subscribe to this channel if you haven't done so already. Also, please share this video with anybody who you think might enjoy it and who you think might benefit from it. Thank you, and I look forward to having you for the next one.